There is a quiet fear many people carry, often unspoken, the fear that something unseen is working against them, that harm can arrive without warning, that they are somehow exposed. But what if that fear is not a reflection of reality, but a reflection of wounds we have not yet understood? When we turn to Psalm 91, we are not just reading words of protection, we are being invited into a deeper psychological and spiritual truth. That safety is not merely the absence of danger, but the presence of connection. Connection to the divine, to meaning, to trust. The idea that evil cannot touch you is not about denying life's hardships, but about recognizing that when the soul is grounded in faith, it becomes untouchable in the ways that matter most. The real question is not whether darkness exists, but whether we allow it to define us, or whether we anchor ourselves in something greater than fear. True protection begins with inner alignment, not external control. Most people spend their lives trying to manage the outside world in order to feel safe. They try to predict outcomes, control situations, and avoid uncertainty. This instinct is deeply human, rooted in our biology and shaped by our experiences. When something has hurt us in the past, the mind learns to stay alert, to anticipate danger before it arrives. But this constant vigilance comes at a cost. It keeps the nervous system in a state of tension, as if safety is always just one step away but never fully reached. Inner alignment offers a different path. It shifts the focus from controlling what is outside to understanding what is within. When a person becomes aligned internally, they are no longer reacting blindly to fear. Instead, they begin to recognize their emotional patterns, their triggers, and the stories they have been carrying. This awareness creates space. In that space, there is a choice whether to respond Hebrew Mem, Hebrew Tav, Hebrew Vav, Hebrew Kaf fear, or Hebrew Mem, Hebrew Tav, Hebrew Vav, Hebrew Kaf trust. Alignment is not about becoming perfect or immune to pain. It is about becoming honest with oneself, about seeing clearly what is happening inside without denial or judgment. When someone is internally aligned, their sense of safety no longer depends entirely on circumstances. Life may still bring challenges, uncertainty, even loss, but there is a groundedness that remains. This groundedness comes from being connected to something deeper than fleeting emotions. It may be a sense of faith, a connection to purpose, or simply the understanding that one's worth is not defined by external events. This kind of inner stability cannot be taken away easily, because it does not rely on conditions that are constantly changing. The need for external control often arises from a lack of trust in life, in others, and most importantly, in oneself. When trust is absent, the mind tries to compensate by tightening its grip on everything it can. But this grip creates resistance, and resistance amplifies fear. Inner alignment, on the other hand, nurtures trust. It allows a person to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to escape it. It encourages curiosity instead of panic, presence instead of avoidance. There is also a physiological aspect to this. When the body feels safe internally, the nervous system can regulate itself more effectively. The fight-or-flight response is no longer constantly activated. Instead, the body can return to a state of balance, where healing and clarity become possible. This is not achieved by eliminating all external threats, but by cultivating an internal environment where the body does not interpret every challenge as danger. Inner alignment also changes how a person relates to fear itself. Fear is no longer seen as an enemy to be destroyed, but as a signal to be understood. It becomes information rather than a command. This shift reduces the power fear holds. Instead of being controlled by it, a person can acknowledge it and still choose how to act. This is where true protection begins, not in the absence of fear, but in the ability to remain centered despite it. In the context of faith, inner alignment means trusting in a higher presence while also taking responsibility for one's inner state. It is not passive. It requires reflection, honesty, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. It asks a person to let go of the illusion that safety can be fully engineered from the outside. Instead, it invites them to cultivate a sense of peace that originates within, a peace that does not collapse when circumstances shift, a peace that remains steady even when the world feels uncertain. Fear often comes from past wounds, not present danger. What many people experience as fear in the moment is rarely about what is actually happening right now. Instead, it is the echo of something that has already happened, something the mind and body have not fully processed or resolved. The human nervous system is designed to protect, and when it encounters pain, especially emotional pain, it learns quickly. It stores that experience not just as a memory, but as a pattern of response. Later, when something even slightly resembles that past experience, the body reacts as if the same threat has returned. This is why fear can feel so intense, even when the situation does not objectively justify it. A tone of voice, a certain look, a moment of silence, or a sense of uncertainty can trigger reactions that seem disproportionate. But they are not random. They are rooted in history. Body is not confused, it is trying to protect based on what it has learned before. The problem is that it cannot always distinguish between what was and what is. When fear is driven by past wounds, it tends to create a distorted perception of reality. The mind fills in gaps with assumptions, often negative ones, because that is what it has been conditioned to expect. This can lead to patterns of avoidance, overthinking, or even self-sabotage. A person may avoid opportunities, relationships, or challenges not because they are inherently dangerous, but because they unconsciously associate them with past pain. In this way, unresolved wounds begin to shape present choices. Understanding this changes the relationship with fear. Instead of seeing it as a reliable indicator of danger, it becomes something to question. What is this fear really about? Is it connected to what is happening now, or is it a response to something older? This kind of inquiry requires honesty and patience. It is not about dismissing fear, but about listening to it more carefully. Fear often carries a message, but that message is not always about immediate threat. Sometimes it is about unmet needs, unprocessed grief, or experiences that were too overwhelming to fully feel at the time. There is also a deep compassion that can arise from this understanding. When a person recognizes that their fear is rooted in past wounds, they can begin to treat themselves with more kindness. Instead of criticizing themselves for being anxious or reactive, they can acknowledge that these responses once served a purpose. They were ways of coping, ways of surviving. But what was necessary in the past may no longer be necessary now. Healing, then, is not about eliminating fear completely. It is about bringing awareness to its origins. As those origins become clearer, the intensity of fear can begin to soften. The body learns slowly that it is no longer in the same environment, that the conditions have changed. Process takes time because the nervous system does not shift instantly. It requires repeated experiences of safety, of presence, of staying with discomfort without being overwhelmed by it. In a spiritual context, this understanding deepens even further. It suggests that the protection one seeks is not about removing all sources of fear, but about transforming the relationship with it. When fear is seen through the lens of past wounds, it loses some of its authority. It is no longer the ultimate guide. Instead, faith and awareness begin to take that role. A person can feel fear and still choose trust, still choose to move forward, still choose to believe in a reality that is not defined by old pain. This is where freedom begins, not in a life without fear, but in a life where fear no longer dictates every decision, where the past is acknowledged but not allowed to control the present, where the individual can stand in the current moment with a clearer perception, recognizing that not every feeling of danger is a reflection of what is truly happening now. Divine connection creates psychological resilience. There is a profound difference between coping with life and being anchored through it. Coping often implies managing stress, getting through difficulty, surviving moment by moment. But resilience is something deeper. It is the capacity to remain intact, to bend without breaking, to face uncertainty without losing one's sense of self. And one of the most powerful sources of that resilience is a genuine connection to the divine. This connection is not merely a belief held in the mind. It is an experience that lives in the body and the psyche. When a person feels connected to something greater than themselves, their perspective shifts. Challenges are no longer seen as isolated threats, but as part of a larger story. This does not remove pain, but it changes how pain is held. It becomes more bearable, more meaningful, less overwhelming. From a psychological standpoint, this kind of connection provides a sense of security that is not dependent on external validation or circumstances. The world can be unpredictable, relationships can change, and plans can fall apart. But when a person is rooted in a deeper connection, there is a continuity that remains. This continuity acts as an internal stabilizer. It reduces the intensity of stress responses and allows the nervous system to return to balance more easily after being activated. There is also an element of surrender and divine connection. Not surrender in the sense of giving up, but in the sense of releasing the illusion of total control. This release can be incredibly relieving. The constant pressure to manage everything, to anticipate every outcome, begins to soften. In its place, there is a trust that not everything has to be carried alone. This trust creates space within the mind and body, space where resilience can grow. Resilience is not about becoming unaffected by life's difficulties. It is about developing the ability to move through them without being defined by them. A person with strong psychological resilience can feel pain, fear, or uncertainty, but these emotions do not completely take over their identity. They remain connected to a deeper sense of self, one that is not easily shaken. Divine connection strengthens this sense of self by anchoring it in something stable and enduring. There is also a relational aspect to this. Human beings are wired for connection. And when that connection includes a sense of the divine, it fulfills a deep psychological need. It provides a feeling of being seen, held, and understood on a level that goes beyond human interaction. This can be especially powerful in moments of isolation or distress, when external support may be limited. The awareness of a constant, unchanging presence can reduce feelings of loneliness and increase a sense of safety. Over time, this connection shapes how a person interprets their experiences. Instead of viewing challenges as purely negative, they may begin to see them as opportunities for growth or transformation. This does not mean denying hardship, but it introduces a different narrative, one that includes purpose and possibility. This narrative supports resilience by preventing the mind from becoming stuck in hopelessness. The practice of nurturing this connection can take many forms: reflection, prayer, mindfulness, or simply moments of stillness where one becomes aware of something beyond the immediate self. These practices are not about escaping reality, but about engaging with it from a place of deeper awareness. They strengthen the internal foundation upon which resilience is built. As this foundation becomes stronger, the individual becomes less reactive to external stressors. They are still affected, but not overwhelmed. There is a capacity to pause, to reflect, to choose a response rather than being driven purely by impulse. This ability is a hallmark of psychological resilience, and it is greatly enhanced by a sense of divine connection that remains steady. Even when circumstances are not, evil loses power when you stop identifying with fear. Much of what people call evil does not operate only through external forces, but through the internal space it occupies. It feeds on attention, on belief, on the emotional energy that is given to it. Fear becomes the doorway. When fear takes over, perception narrows, clarity fades, and the mind begins to interpret everything through a lens of threat. In that state, even neutral situations can feel dangerous, and imagined harm can feel as real as actual harm. Identifying with fear means more than simply feeling it. It means merging with it, allowing it to define your thoughts, your reactions, and ultimately your sense of self. Instead of saying, "I feel afraid," the inner experience becomes, "I am afraid," as if fear is not just a passing state, but a fixed identity. This shift may seem subtle, but it changes everything. When fear becomes identity, it gains authority. It begins to dictate behavior, limit possibilities, and shape how reality is perceived. When a person stops identifying with fear, something important happens. Fear is still present, but it is no longer in control. It becomes one part of the internal experience, not the whole of it. This creates distance, a psychological space where observation becomes possible. In that space, fear can be seen more clearly. Patterns, its triggers, its intensity can be recognized without immediately reacting to it. This awareness weakens its grip. Evil in this context can be understood as anything that seeks to dominate through fear, whether it is external negativity, harmful influences, or internal patterns that reinforce a sense of helplessness. Its power depends on how deeply it can embed itself in the mind. When a person is fully identified with fear, they are more susceptible to this influence. Their decisions become reactive, their thoughts become distorted, and their sense of agency diminishes. Breaking this identification does not require eliminating fear entirely, which is neither realistic nor necessary. It requires a shift in relationship. Instead of resisting fear or trying to suppress it, a person can learn to acknowledge it without surrendering to it. This is not an act of denial, but of awareness. It involves recognizing that fear is a signal, not a command, and that it does not have to define every response. There is also a deeper layer to this process. Often the fears people identify with are rooted in earlier experiences, moments where they felt powerless, unsafe, or overwhelmed. These experiences leave impressions that can resurface later in life. When they do, they can feel immediate and overwhelming, as if the past is happening again in the present. Identifying with these feelings reinforces their intensity. But when they are observed rather than absorbed, their influence begins to diminish. From a spiritual perspective, this shift is significant. It suggests that the essence of a person is not their fear, but something deeper and more stable. When that deeper sense of self is recognized, fear loses its central position. It becomes something that can be experienced without being obeyed. This is where a sense of inner freedom begins to emerge. As this freedom grows, the hold of negative influences weakens. They may still exist, but they no longer have the same access or impact. A person becomes less reactive, more grounded, and more capable of responding with clarity rather than impulse. This does not mean life becomes free of challenges, but it does mean that those challenges no longer have the same power to disrupt the inner state. Over time, this way of relating to fear changes the entire internal landscape. The mind becomes less dominated by threat-based thinking and more open to presence, awareness, and intentional action. The individual is longer moving through life as someone constantly trying to avoid danger, but as someone who can face uncertainty without losing their center. Someone who can experience fear without becoming its safety is a state of being, not a guarantee of circumstances. Most people grow up believing that safety comes from controlling what happens around them, having the right conditions, the right people, the right outcomes. If everything aligns, then they feel secure. But life does not operate in a way that allows for constant predictability. Situations change, people change, and uncertainty is always present in some form. When safety is tied only to external conditions, it becomes fragile, easily disrupted by anything unexpected. A state of being, on the other hand, is something internal. It is not dependent on whether everything is going according to plan. It is rooted in how a person relates to their experience in the present moment. When safety becomes a state of being, it reflects a regulated nervous system, a grounded awareness, and a capacity to remain connected to oneself even when external circumstances are unstable. This kind of safety is not about eliminating challenges, but about developing the ability to move through them without losing a sense of inner stability. The human body plays a central role in this. When the nervous system perceives safety, it shifts into a state where the body can rest, think clearly, and respond rather than react. This does not require perfect conditions. It requires signals, internal and external, that communicate a sense of support and stability. These signals can come from breath, posture, awareness, and the way one interprets what is happening. Over time, a person can learn to generate these signals internally, reducing their reliance on external validation of safety. This does not mean ignoring real threats or pretending that everything is fine when it is not. It means distinguishing between actual danger and perceived danger. Many of the situations that trigger anxiety are not immediate threats to survival, but they feel that way because of how they are processed internally. When safety is understood as a state of being, a person can acknowledge discomfort or uncertainty without automatically interpreting it as danger. This reduces the intensity of the stress response and allows for more thoughtful, intentional action. There is also a psychological dimension to this. When safety is internalized, it becomes less conditional. A person does not need everything to be perfect in order to feel okay. They can tolerate ambiguity, navigate difficult emotions, and remain present even when things are unclear. This tolerance is a key component of resilience. It allows for flexibility, for adaptation, for growth. Without it, the mind tends to become rigid, constantly seeking certainty and becoming distressed when it cannot find it. In a spiritual sense, viewing safety as a state of being aligns with the idea of trust not in specific outcomes, but in the process of life itself. It suggests that even when circumstances are challenging, there is a deeper foundation that remains steady. This foundation may be rooted in faith, in meaning, or in a sense of connection to something beyond immediate experience. It provides a form of grounding that does not collapse when external conditions shift. As a person cultivates this internal sense of safety, their relationship with the world begins to change. They are less driven by the need to control everything and more open to experiencing life as it unfolds. This openness does not make them passive, rather, it allows them to act with greater clarity and intention. They are able to engage with challenges without being overwhelmed by them, to face uncertainty without immediately retreating into fear. Over time, this internal state becomes more consistent. It is not that fear or discomfort disappears, but that they no longer dominate the experience. There is a background sense of steadiness that remains even when emotions fluctuate. This steadiness is what allows a person to move through life with a sense of confidence that is not dependent on constant reassurance. A confidence that comes from within rather than from circumstances that are always subject to change. Faith transforms vulnerability into strength. Vulnerability is often misunderstood as weakness, as something to hide or protect against. Many people learn early in life that showing vulnerability can lead to pain, rejection, judgment, or disappointment. As a result, they begin to build defenses. They suppress emotions, avoid openness, and try to present a version of themselves that appears strong and unaffected. But these defenses, while protective in the short term, often create a deeper sense of disconnection from others and from oneself. At its core, vulnerability is simply the willingness to be open to experience without excessive control. It is the capacity to feel deeply, to care, to take emotional risks. Without it, there is no genuine connection, no growth, no transformation. Yet vulnerability also exposes a person to uncertainty. There are no guarantees in being open. This is where faith becomes essential. Faith in this context is not blind belief or passive acceptance. It is an active trust in something greater than immediate outcomes. It is the willingness to remain open even when the result is unknown. When faith is present, vulnerability no longer feels like standing on unstable ground. Instead, it feels like stepping into a space where one is supported, even if that support is not always visible. Psychologically, this shift changes how vulnerability is experienced. Without faith, vulnerability can trigger fear of being hurt, of losing control, of being exposed. The mind may try to shut down or retreat as a way of avoiding that discomfort. But with faith, there is a different internal response. There is a sense that even if comfort arises, it can be held, understood, and integrated. This reduces the need for rigid defenses and allows for a more fluid engagement with life. There is also a deep courage in this. To remain vulnerable while trusting requires strength. It means choosing openness despite the possibility of pain. It means allowing oneself to feel without immediately trying to escape or numb the experience. This kind of courage is not loud or forceful. It is quiet, steady, and persistent. It is the strength to stay present. Faith also reframes the meaning of difficult experiences. When a person believes that there is a larger purpose or a deeper order to life, vulnerability becomes less threatening. Challenges and emotional exposures are not seen as random or purely harmful, but as part of a process that can lead to growth. This does not eliminate pain, but it changes its significance. Pain becomes something that can be worked through rather than something that must be avoided at all costs. In relationships, this transformation is particularly evident. A person who operates from faith is more likely to engage authentically. They are less guarded, more willing to express themselves honestly. This openness fosters deeper connections because it invites others to be open as well. While there is always a risk in this, faith provides a sense of grounding that makes the risk bearable. There is also an internal aspect to this transformation. When vulnerability is embraced through faith, a person becomes more accepting of their own emotional landscape. They are less likely to judge themselves for feeling fear, sadness, or uncertainty. Instead, these emotions are seen as natural parts of the human experience. This self-acceptance reduces internal conflict and creates a more cohesive sense of self. Over time, the combination of vulnerability and faith builds a form of strength that is not dependent on avoidance or control. It is a strength that comes from being fully engaged with life, from being willing to experience it in its complexity. This strength is resilient because it does not rely on maintaining a rigid exterior. It adapts, it grows, and it remains connected to something deeper than surface-level security in this way. What once felt like exposure becomes a source of empowerment, and what once seemed like weakness reveals itself as a pathway to a more grounded, authentic, and enduring form of strength.